Hello guys, welcome to the Eat Like Ruby podcast. I feel like I always say welcome back, but I'm just going to say welcome in case somebody stumbles along the Eat Like Ruby podcast for the first time today. Welcome. And if you are a long-time listener, then welcome back. Today I'm here with another solo episode. So last week I did a solo episode and I spoke a little bit about just checking in with yourself and your 2023 goals. Obviously, we're sitting around the middle of the year, and I think it's just a great time to revisit those and see what the plans, what the goals were that you set at the start of the year. How are they going? Are you killing it? Are you not? Are you killing it with some things, maybe not with others? And just really getting aware of that. I won't go into too much of that episode again. Obviously, go back and listen to that one if you haven't, because I think today's will flow on really nicely. So I think it'd be cool to listen to both. But one thing I touched on in that episode last week was to do this reflection and have this little assessment and conversation with yourself now, as opposed to leaving it too late in the year. And often we see people start to do really drastic things with nutrition and training coming into summer or coming into holidays, whatever it is. And often we've left that too late, and that's where we see a lot of crazy things or restrictive things, unsustainable, challenges, habits, meal plans, whatever it is. I think it's really worth recognizing that, especially have a think, like if you're someone that's done that in recent years, do you need to look at this now as opposed to leaving it too late? So like I said, today's episode is going to flow on from that. And I thought I would talk about some of the common reasons that I see people not achieving their goals, even if they're someone that is trying really hard, like they're putting a lot of time and energy into their nutrition or training, and they don't feel like they're achieving what they want to be. So obviously I've been in the nutrition and training space for a very long time, and you start to see things all the time where you think like so many people are, stuck in this, or they're repeating this and they're just not really getting it. So I thought it'd be cool to kind of bring some awareness to those things, maybe give out some advice, like wherever it goes. But I think it's just a great time to follow on from last week, talk about some of those things. And again, it's really just going to be a matter of seeing what applies to you and what doesn't. So we might talk about things today and all of them might just land with you and you'll be like, yeah, shit, she's talking to me. Or some of them might be like that and some of them might not be. So obviously nutrition and training is so different for everybody. So I think it's just always cool to come into these things with an open mind and be honest with what actually resonates with you and what doesn't. And then, like I said, you can have that awareness now and see if you need to make any changes for the back half of the year. So one of the first things I want to talk about today, I've got about 3 or 4 pointers that I wanted to talk about today. We've spoken about this a little bit on the podcast in a few different ways, but I really want to bring awareness and really speak to it today. One really common thing I see with people that are working on their nutrition, this is a big nutrition point, is often we see, like with flexible dieting or with nutrition, even just with dieting in general, people can talk a lot about the 80-20 rule. A lot of people refer to it too, being like 80% whole foods, 20% soul foods is a phrase people often like to use, or even just like the real underlying thing there being everything in moderation, or we can include anything in moderation, which obviously, if you guys follow Eat Like Ruby, if you've listened to the podcast, if you've been in my world in any way before, you'll know obviously I'm a huge fan of this. But a real issue that I see here is often people preach this as the answer to a typical like restriction and binge cycle. So we don't have to cut anything out. We can have everything in moderation. People then often take that and still spend a large part of their life cutting everything out and then having small amounts of moderation, but they haven't learned how to actually structure it well and enjoy it. And it ends up being still quite a restriction and binge cycle. So what I'm talking about here is a real typical cycle we tend to see is people cutting a lot of things out during the week, following a diet that's quite unenjoyable. They're leaving out all their favorite foods. They're restricting a lot of things, and they're sort of saving that like everything in moderation for the weekend. And we used to see this a lot with people having a cheat meal. And I don't know if people still do this. Like in my world, if you've been in Eat Like Ruby before, you will know like I never use the word cheat meal. I've never told a client to have a cheat meal. Like that's just not how we do things at all. So I feel like to me, I think people aren't doing this anymore, but then I'm like, probably a lot of people actually still are. So what I'm getting at here is often we see people, like I said, leaving everything out during the week, doing something quite intense, something quite restrictive, and then, you know, air quotes, saving their favorite things or foods they want to enjoy just for the weekend. And this can tend to still lead to that restriction and binge cycle when we think about it. If we are cutting so many things out during the week and following a diet that we don't really enjoy and we're really restricting ourselves, often people then get to the weekend and it's somewhat uncontrolled. It might be a bit of a blowout. It is a cheat meal, like whatever we call it. But people can sort of convince themselves, or they can go into this with the belief of, you know, but you can have things in moderation. So I'm allowed to have a day like this, or I'm allowed to have a meal like this. And like I said, I am the biggest advocate of not cutting things out and having everything in moderation. But there's a very big difference between doing this in a way you enjoy versus a way that you don't enjoy. And when we think about that restriction and binge sort of cycle, and I say restriction and binge just to describe it, it doesn't have to be crazy restriction and crazy binge. It can be for some people, but even if you just find that you spend 5 or 6 days a week eating in a way you don't really enjoy, and then you're sort of hanging for those 2 days to eat all of your favorite things. And like I said, often when people do this, they're sort of trying to convince themselves, if they will, or they're, I don't want to say fooling themselves, like I'm not saying this in a rude way, but often people are like, oh, well, that's a good way to do things because I still get to have everything in moderation. But when we think about it, like I said, it's a long, like majority of your life you're doing something you don't enjoy. And then often we spend that meal or that day, whatever it is that you've decided where you can eat other foods, often that's somewhat not enjoyable either because it is that sort of blowout cheat thing. We haven't actually learned how to moderate things. It is a little bit of a free-for-all, or like, shit, I've got to enjoy everything, because maybe subconsciously or maybe consciously you're like, as of Monday, I'm back to eating things I don't enjoy. So the real point I'm trying to get at here is if you are somebody who is trying to adopt a diet that is everything in moderation and nothing is ruled out, really have a look and think like, am I still actually ruling things out most of the time though? And is it then creating quite an unenjoyable loop overall when we're stuck in that cycle? And a really good thing to think about here, or it's not good to think, but it is something you want to think about, is if you are doing that, and we've spoken about this in really early days on the podcast, so if you're a long-term listener, you might be having a bit of deja vu, but if we do this and we cut things out for most of the week, and then we do find that there is a day or 2 days, maybe 3, where we're going for it and eating other foods, so much so that we go quite hard, it can lead to that cycle of 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. Like we spend all week somewhat progressing, then we spend a few days undoing that progress, and then we go again. The number one thing to look at here is if you are spending more time than not following nutrition protocols that you do not enjoy and you don't have the result that you want to show for that, that's a massive red flag. If you think about that, I'm spending most of my time doing something I do not enjoy and it's not getting me to where I want to be. That is a huge, huge thing to look at. That's a huge red flag, and that's what we can often see this cycle doing. And when we say like not being where you want to be, this can mean in terms of like your physical result and your body composition, but it can also just be your mental health, your emotional health. Are you spending a lot of time, you know, fighting your diet or fighting your restrictions or your cravings or whatever, like really just sort of grinding through a shitty diet and then only having a day or 2 that you do enjoy, or not even enjoying that day or 2 because it is somewhat of a blowout and you're feeling quite out of control with that. And again, we sort of step back and we think, okay, a lot of the time I'm actually really not enjoying this and it's not leaving me in a good position. That's something that we really want to tap into, and that's something where I've said in recent weeks, we want to seek education or a program or a coach or whatever it is to rectify things like that. That's a big one. If you can relate to that and you're sitting there thinking, yeah, shit, that's actually me, that is really something to look at. And so I'm going to go into the next point now, but like always, everything's probably going to tie in and I'm probably going to bounce back and forth. We'll just see where it goes. But the next thing I want to speak to, and I feel like I might have dabbled in this a little bit on the podcast before, but if you're in an Eat Like Ruby program, you've probably heard this a little bit more. I tend to talk about this with clients because we speak a little bit more to their specific situation. But this can be applied to so many situations. And it's really becoming aware of the stories and the beliefs that you have about yourself or about your nutrition or about your training. And what I mean here is when people say things as simple as, you know, I can't not have a wine at night, or I can't not get a coffee in the morning. I'm not a morning person. I can't go to gym in the morning, or, you know, maybe the other way around. I can't go to gym at night. There may be things here where there's a level of truth where it's just not ideal for your lifestyle to get up and go to the gym in the morning. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I am talking about is just becoming aware of, first of all, the language and the mindset and the belief that that language leads to. So if we're someone that's just like, I can't get up and go to the gym in the morning, I would argue and say, gun to your head, get up tomorrow morning and go to the gym. You probably could. And again, it might not be ideal. It might not be optimal for your lifestyle, but it's worth looking at these things and actually making that assessment of what is optimal and ideal for my lifestyle versus what am I just so set in my ways with, like, no, I can't do that. I can't not do that. We see this all the time. And like I said, there's those real typical ones of, you know, I can't not have a drink at night, or I can't not have ice cream after dinner, whatever it is. Again, gun to your head, don't have an ice cream tonight. You probably wouldn't have one. Or I'll give you $1 million. Don't have an ice cream tonight. You could probably go with that. So, and again, if we think about the first point I just made, like, I'm the biggest advocate of everything in moderation. I'm not saying we can't do those things, but we always want to be aware and conscious and in control of our habits and the things we're doing. We don't want to be in that mentality of like, that's just the way I am, or that's just the way it is. You want to tap into anything that you're believing, anything that you're thinking, and therefore anything that you're doing, and just assess if it's serving you. Is it the most optimal? Is it the most ideal? And there absolutely will be things where you're like, okay, my belief is that I train better in the mornings than I would at night. Is that actually true? Yes, it is. Awesome. Tick it off. Keep doing it. That's perfect. So this is not about making everything wrong and changing all of your habits. It's about being aware of those habits in the first place. And especially the ones where we do see all the time where people are just like, I can't not do that. That's just not me. And it's like, again, it could be. And I just think it's so important to really become aware of that and not just run that story. And when we think about the wording and the stories, if we are saying those things, whether it's out loud or even just to ourselves every day, of course you're going to start believing that. If you're saying the same thing every day, day after day, week after week, for months, maybe for years, of course you're going to believe like, no, I'm actually just not a morning person. It's like, well, yeah, because you fucking told yourself that every day for the last 3 years. What if you got up and went to gym tomorrow morning? You could be a morning person. So I think this is such a big one where people just have to have that awareness and make those assessments for themselves. And on a really similar note, another story or another line that I see so often is, again, this it really comes back to the wording, is people that will say things like, I'm addicted to sugar. And I think I have so much to say on this, and it ties in with what we just said where, you know, are you actually like pull that apart, really, really look at that instead of just saying, oh, I'm so addicted to sugar. And this could be anything, like you could be running, you know, you could be saying like, I'm addicted to anything, but a lot of people say this with sugar. I've seen this so much. And like I said, there's so much I want to say here. The first thing we want to look at here is, and I say this with so much respect, but when someone is truly addicted to something, like that's a whole nother level. So if you're running that story and constantly sort of using that wording of I'm addicted to sugar, actually are you? Actually, are you addicted to sugar is the first thing you want to look at here, because again, like I said, I don't mean any disrespect, but when we think about someone who is an addict, right? If you think about this, most people in Australia have a sugar jar in their kitchen, in their pantry, with their tea and coffee, whatever. If you were a sugar addict, you would be in that pantry every night spooning sugar from the jar. I would argue that not many people in Australia are in their pantry in the middle of the night eating straight sugar from a jar. Again, if we think about someone that is truly an addict, if someone was addicted to cocaine, they wouldn't be able to go to sleep at night knowing there was a cocaine jar in the pantry. Oh, that's fine, I just won't have any. No way. Like, an actual addict is in that pantry. So again, and that probably sounds extreme, but this is actually why I want to talk about it, because I think it's extreme to be telling yourself every day, like, I'm addicted to something, when it's like, well, no, you're actually not. We've just pulled that apart and we've actually just revealed that no, you are not, unless you are, like I said, standing in that pantry eating sugar from the jar. Or even think about it, if we go out to a cafe, there's like sugar sachets on the table. Is anyone cracking that open and just tipping it down their throat? Maybe they are. And honestly, like, that's obviously a whole nother thing. But I think we see all the time people slap things like this on themselves or whatever. They're like, oh, I can't get results because I'm addicted to sugar. And it's like, really look at your wording of everything. Look at everything that you're saying and you're thinking and you're believing, and pull it apart. And with this one, it's a perfect example. It's like, for 99% of people, no, you're not. Most people, when we think about this, air quote, sugar addiction, most foods that we're loving or we're addicted to with sugar in them are things like chocolate, cake, pastries, donuts. When we think about that, we're not addicted to sugar. We enjoy highly palatable foods that are usually a combo of sugar and fat, and we haven't learned how to include them and enjoy them in moderation. That's really what it is. When we think, like I said, I'm addicted to sugar versus no, I actually just fucking love chocolate, people sort of tie them in as the same things, but no, they're not. It's like, you just haven't learned how to enjoy those foods you like in moderation. You're not, like I said, spooning sugar or eating random things like that because you're addicted. It's really about enjoying, like I said, those highly palatable foods and not knowing how to moderate them. And so that ties in so much with all the other points where we just want to get the awareness around that. And like I said, often, like, you might have heard that and been like, oh, that's extreme or that's dramatic or whatever. But I think it's extreme or dramatic to be wording something in a way that's actually incorrect and then letting that become your story and your belief and running with that for years or months, whatever it is, and cock blocking yourself from a result or from progressing in the direction you want to go because you're clinging to a story that's not even true. That's extreme. And that's what I really want to bring awareness to today. And like I said at the start of the episode, getting aware of that now and really tapping into that now and thinking, yeah, shit, that actually could apply to me in some way, whatever the story or the belief or whatever it is for you. And then starting to think, okay, cool, how do I change this? What do I do about this? And there's probably one more point that I want to make today, and it sort of ties in with everything we've said. It's a little bit of a new topic as well. But I think this is so important to talk about, and I think this is a big thing for people to get aware of if you've found yourself in this position before. And the thing I want to talk about right now is intuitive eating. And I think this is a massive topic. Like, we could probably even do a whole nother podcast on this. The very first thing I want to say is I'm not against intuitive eating. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, basically intuitive eating is exactly what it sounds like. We don't follow a diet. We don't count calories. We don't weigh food. We don't rule anything out. We literally just eat intuitively, as in, like, what do I feel like eating? So we see this a lot where there can be a big movement where people are pushing intuitive eating. And I think that's awesome in a way. Like I said, I'm definitely not against intuitive eating, so please don't take this that way. I think there are a small handful of people on the planet that can actually just naturally, intuitively eat. I think there are certain people who haven't, struggled with dieting or body image or anything, and it just hasn't been that big of a deal for them to just eat and not give it too much thought. And if someone is truly doing that, amen. Like, so much respect. And I would like to think that if you're a long-term listener, I'm never against any form of dieting if it truly works for a person. If somebody is so adamant on their nutrition and their diet and their approach, and it is truly working for them. I have so much respect for that. And even as a side note, if any of you guys listened to the episode I did with Joel, he's like a good friend of mine. We have such different ways of eating, and that's why I got him in here. But we have so much respect for each other because his way of eating truly works for him and my way of eating truly works for me. So I would never sit here and say, what you're doing is wrong, you should be doing X, Y, Z, because I truly know that that works for him. So again, the point I'm trying to make here is I would never tell a person that what they're doing is wrong if it genuinely is working for them. So if somebody is intuitively eating and they're loving it, they're in good physical health, good mental health, good emotional health, their nutrition and their diet is having a positive impact on their health, amen. So much respect for that. But a really common thing I see with intuitive eating is people attempting to follow certain diets, whether it's flexible dieting and counting calories or it's any other diet. Usually it's often an attempt at a few, like people have tried a few diets. They've most likely, quote, failed, felt like they haven't succeeded with that diet. And sometimes we see people then move into this motion of like, I'm intuitive eating. I should be able to do this. Fuck diets, fuck calories, fuck this, whatever. And a really common thing I've seen over the years is people doing this in a way that they act like it's positive and they act like it's quite a liberating thing. Like, I'm just going to eat intuitively. And for some people, they're truly trying to convince themselves. They're trying to convince other people. It could be a subconscious thing. Like, I'm not having a go at these people because often we're doing this. We're trying to do this in a positive way. But again, coming back to what I was saying, it can often be a result of somewhat feeling like you've failed with other things, somewhat getting backed into a corner and being like, you know what, fuck it, I should just be able to intuitively eat. And then people try and sort of dress it up as a positive thing. And I think we see this as well. I'm going to try not to get too off topic, but like I said, I've got so much to say about this. I think when someone's very vocal about their diet, we've all got that friend that's like, I'm doing keto this week and now I'm doing vegetarian and now I'm doing paleo and whatever. If someone has put it out there and said they're doing multiple things, they then start to think like, shit, is everybody seeing that I'm failing? Like last week I was keto, this week I'm doing this, whatever. So then they'll dress up this intuitive eating thing again of like, fuck it, I'm just going intuitive, guys. Like, we don't need all this. It's so unnecessary, whatever. But it can come from a position of feeling like they failed everything else. They don't know what to do. And it's sort of a last resort, if that makes sense. People, whether they're in that position or they're just trying intuitive eating, even if they're succeeding with intuitive eating, a lot of people run this story of like, we were designed to intuitively eat, right? So people will say like, we don't need to count calories. We don't need to go on a diet. We don't need to monitor our nutrition. We don't need to learn about nutrition, whatever. We were designed to intuitively eat is a really common thing people say. I disagree. We were designed to hunt and gather and eat to survive. There's a very big difference. And people often will then start to play the ancestor card here. Our ancestors knew how to intuitively eat. Our ancestors didn't know how to intuitively eat. Our ancestors would eat whatever the fuck they could find to survive. Such a big difference. And even this can go in so many directions because, in all honesty, people will play the ancestor card when it's convenient and it backs up their story. If you truly want to live like our ancestors, turn off your air conditioning, throw out your phone and sell your car. Seriously, it's very convenient to say, let's just do what our ancestors did until I want to play on my iPhone and drive in my car and set my air conditioning. And on the same note, like I said, our ancestors weren't intuitively eating in terms of waking up and saying, now what do I feel like eating today? They were like, what can we find? What's in season? What have we hunted? How can we actually eat to survive today? There's such a big difference there. And again, coming back to the whole thing of people saying like, we were designed to intuitively eat. Again, I would argue, no, we were not. And we were also not designed to have such insane access to such highly palatable foods so easily. We cannot argue that we should just know how to eat because we were designed to do that. We were not designed to be able to walk into Woolworths and buy 6 pizzas and a mud cake. If you want to talk about what human beings were designed to do, it's not that. So whether you're somebody who maybe preaches these points, I feel like I could debate you a little bit, or if you're someone that has tried intuitive eating and is like, why am I failing at this thing that I should just be able to do? I would argue that we shouldn't really be able to do it. It makes sense that we can't do it, or most people, I should say, can't do it that well in the environment that we live in now, in the time that we live in now. Like I said, we have access to so many things. It's just simply a different time. And the other point to look at there is we kind of run that story, or some people will make that argument of we were designed to intuitively eat, so we shouldn't have to learn how to do it, or we shouldn't have to go on a diet or invest or whatever. Like I said, there's so many reasons why I would argue that. But even if we want to look at that from a different angle, we were also designed to run. Does that mean we should never invest in a running coach? If somebody's shit at running, and like I actually want to get better at this, it makes sense to invest in someone that can teach them how to do it. Or on the same note, if someone's good at running and they're like, I want to be great, again, are we like, well, no, you shouldn't invest in anyone to teach you how to do that, because you're a human being. You're actually designed to just know how to do that. There are a lot of things we were designed to know how to do, air quotes, but it doesn't mean we can't invest in learning how to do it better. And I think if we tie in all those factors I've just said, like maybe yes, at some point we were just designed to know how to eat, but things have changed so much. The world has changed so much. We were not designed to know how to eat in this environment with the access that we have to everything these days. And that's where I think simply telling people to intuitively eat, whether, like I said, you're someone who argues like everyone should just intuitively eat, or you're someone who's maybe bashed themselves up a little bit, like why can't I just do this thing? If we tie in all those points, it makes so much sense why we can't do this thing. Like I would switch that wording of intuitively eating to educated eating. I think for majority of people, like I said before, there might be a small handful of people who can just naturally do this well. I would say most people that are intuitively eating now have had some level of education and understanding of nutrition, and they've worked towards that point. If we think about even, I'll use myself as a perfect example. I have not really tracked my food for the last 3 or 4 months. Like I was writing the book, low-key plug of my book, Simple Meals, but I was just preoccupied. I was doing other things. And if you've listened to the podcast, like I didn't really have a goal that needed me to track my food or whatever, but every day I'm still mindful of things like fruit, veggies, protein, fiber, all of these things. I wasn't just intuitively born to know how to eat enough protein. There's a level of education and understanding there. And obviously I've got actual nutrition education, but even a person that's just done something like Eat Like Ruby or a similar program, and you've got enough awareness and enough education and understanding, you can then take that and eat somewhat intuitively, but you're not solely relying on like, what do I feel like today? There's still a part of your brain that naturally is just like, oh, where can I get enough protein? Oh, have I had enough fiber? Should I have some more veggies? That's not intuitive. That's educated. And I think often we see people like, on the internet, whether it's people like myself that are in the nutrition and training space, or even influencers, Fitspo people, whatever it is, and we think like, oh, that person doesn't track their food, or they don't follow a diet or whatever, they just, air quote, intuitively eat. I would say 99% of those people have spent some time either tracking food, counting calories, doing a certain diet, and learning enough that they can make those educated decisions on a daily basis without actually having to follow specific rules. And even if we think about somebody who maybe does do like a vegetarian diet or a paleo diet or something, probably in the first few weeks or the few months when they started that thing, there was a lot of research, especially something like paleo, where most of us don't just intuitively know what paleo is. You've probably looked it up, you've researched it, what can I have, what can I not, what constitutes a paleo diet. It's very strict, it's very structured at the start. And then the more you know about that thing, you just start to make your decisions based on that. So you're no longer like researching and weighing and making sure everything's meticulous, but it's not intuitive because you're using all of that education and everything that you've built over those weeks and months to now just make informed decisions. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is if you're somebody who, like I said, we're middle of the year, we're sort of assessing, are we where we want to be? Are we not? I think it can be common to think, well, shit, like I had this goal, I'm failing, fuck this, whatever, I'm just going to intuitively eat. People give that a crack. They maybe don't feel that great, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever, like it doesn't work out for them like they thought they would. And then they're like, shit, I can't even do this. Like, and the underlying thing there is kind of, like I said, beating yourself up and it's like, what's wrong with me or whatever. I don't think there's anything wrong with you. I think we need to drop the narrative that we should just be able to manage our nutrition perfectly in this day and age. Like I said, you can order any food, anything at any time. The access to this shit is wild. If we have not learned how to control that and implement that in our life in a moderate way that actually works for us, of course you're going to be in a shit fight. Like, of course you're going to be going back and forth. Like, I could literally pick up my phone right now and order this food, but shit, I shouldn't. No, you know what? Intuitive eating, yes, I should. And we spiral so much. And this is where we see people get really lost with their nutrition because there's so many things that people believe they, air quotes, should be able to do. But I don't think we should be beating ourselves up for not being able to do things that we haven't learned how to do. So like I said in last week's episode, over the coming weeks, obviously we're starting to come into that time of year where I advise people to start looking at these things. I think, like I said before, a lot of people, you leave this until too late. So if that's you, get aware of that and think, yeah, well, I'm going to start looking at it now. And I think last week's episode is a great place to start. Obviously, you've just listened to this one. And over the coming weeks, I just really want to speak to all the things that I would be looking at, thinking about, getting aware of to move in the direction that you want to go for the back half of the year. And we said it last week, but I just think it's really important to be aware of any goals that you set at the start of this year and really thinking like, have I set those goals multiple times? Have I set a goal at the start of the year that I actually set the year before? I set it coming into summer last year. I'm thinking about setting that same goal coming into summer again and really starting to acknowledge that you're not achieving that goal and really start to look at why. And that's what I really want to open up the awareness and the conversation around. Are we spinning our wheels and trying to achieve that same thing over and over, but not actually achieving it? That's really why I want to start having these conversations now. So over the coming weeks, I'm going to hopefully have a few guests. I've got a few things lined up that I think are just going to tie in so well with all of this. And I'll look at doing another Instagram Q&A. So I love to just put that box up on Instagram about what you guys actually want to know about certain topics with nutrition and training, and we'll cover those as well in the coming weeks. So if you're not following me on Instagram, it's eat_like_Ruby, and we will be back in the next few weeks with all of these topics.